And one of the most important concepts to understand as an artist is that of value, contrast and range. So if you've ever played about with the contrast button on your TV set or on the photo editor of a smartphone, for example, then you'll know the effect of increasing or decreasing contrast. So decreasing the contrast of an image has the effect of darkening the light values and lightening the dark values. So essentially it brings all of the values closer together. So an image like this is said to have a narrow range of values because there's not a lot of difference between the lightest light and the darkest darks. Now on the other hand, the increase in the contrast darkens the darks and lightens the lights, so it widens that range between the lightest light and the darkest dark. The exception is studio photography, which tends to flood an object with light from multiple directions with the purpose of eliminating as many of those shadows as possible. Now probably the number one mistake that you'll see both in drawings and paintings is a lack of contrast or a narrow range of values. And it's nearly always because the darks aren't made dark enough. Most of us don't have trouble seeing the lightest highlights and then maybe leaving the white of the paper to show through for those highlight areas. But for some reason, darker values are nearly always understated. It's as though somehow there's a fear of making things too dark and perhaps then not being able to erase them later on. But the result of that is an image that is going to look flat and insipid. So let's take a look at a drawing now that makes poor use of value contrast and has a narrow range of values, and let's see how we can go about fixing them. You might recognise this fella from one of the earlier shadow mapping exercises. So I've completed the drawing and I've spent some time shading the various contours and features. What I've failed to do though is make the shadows, the mane and the tail, the facial features a dark enough value. And then I've also not retained bright enough highlights on some of the areas of the horse's body. So what we've got essentially here is a value range that goes from a reasonably light value but through to what is not a very strong value. So the range of values from here to here is quite narrow. So let's spend a little bit of time now just looking at how we can lift this image just by strengthening those darks. And what you'll notice as we strengthen those darks is that the lights, the highlights, bring themselves out. So I've got a trusty 9B heavyweight pencil. It's going to give me some nice strong values. And the first thing that I'm going to do is lift those form shadows. So we can go as dark as we like. You can see on the reference, this is almost completely black. So I don't need to worry about any detail within this area. I can just completely eliminate all of the details, all of the paper behind this darkest value. Same around the horse's head area. Anywhere there's a form shadow on this particular image, because of the way the light is falling, is almost completely black. And then let's look at the form shadow underneath the horse's stomach. Some on this front leg. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just bring up the value of the tail and the mane. Now the result of lifting those darks is that it's made everything else in comparison seem too light. So what we've got to do now is start to bring up some of the mid-tones, some of these areas around here, bring the value of these up, and what that's going to do in turn is going to lift these highlight areas without us actually having to lift out anything with our eraser. So for this I'm going to use a 2B. Just blending any of the transitions between the darkest darks there and as it gradually curves around, so we can work a little bit on that shadow edge there just to blend it in slightly. Quite a dark area on the top of the back there. And I'm not worried for this exercise, trying to get the patterns of light and shadow exactly right on the horse's body. As an exercise, we're looking to create an overall sense of form. Soften that area around there. If you imagine this area of the horse's face is a little bit like a sphere, so it gradually goes from a lighter value through to a darker value. It doesn't suddenly jump from a light value to a dark value. There's a bit of a subtle gradation there. And then I'm just going to go back to my 9B just so I can lift some values again within this area. The 2B isn't cutting it for getting dark enough values in here, but that's okay. You can swap between pencils as often as you like. So hopefully now that looks a little bit more three-dimensional, a bit more solid than it did before. And all that we've done is we've lifted the values, the darkest darks, and we've increased that tonal range. So now our lightest value is not quite the white of the paper, but very light indeed. And our darkest value is as dark as we can get with a 9B pencil. So the range between this and this now is much greater than it was before between this and this. I've got two more drawings here, but this time from our tutor members that sent them in for critique. Now this first drawing has got a lot of very good qualities to it. The subject matter portrait is as difficult as it gets. There's some very intricate shading going on, and I think it's fair to say that the artist here isn't a beginner. Now I've printed this image out onto regular copier or printer paper, and when you do print things out you never retain the exact values of the digital image. Also, when the artist took the photograph of their drawing, the lighting conditions may have distorted the values as well. But overall, a photograph isn't going to change the range of values too much. So the difference between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. And it won't disrupt the contrast between light and dark values that are next to each other. So I can see that this drawing is crying out for some stronger darks. Now if you look at the periphery of the drawing, so this arm here, the cap here, the gentleman's cap, the values here are very light, and to be fair, I think that's by design. So less detail and lighter values around these areas create like a vignette effect, and what it does is it helps to draw the viewer's attention to the central focal points. So we're going to ignore those for now and focus on the values around this area here, and in particular the focal point, which I think is the hands on this piece. So again, I've got my trusty 9B pencil. We are limited with the amount of darks that we can get on a piece of photocopier printer paper, but we'll just see how we get on. So the first area I'm going to focus on is this area around the hand here. And you can see that this value here, for me, this is one of the darkest values in the entire composition. Apart from the little boy's hat there, this value is as dark as it gets. So I'm going to go as dark as I can within the hand area there. And this value carries on within the creases of these fingers. Between this finger here, it's a little bit lighter there, but it's still very dark. And again, this is, for me, the focal point of the drawing. You could argue that it's the faces, the two faces together. This is the area that I'm drawn to most. Okay, the next area I'm going to look at is this area inside here. And the values around here, although there's a check shirt going on, so we've got lighter values of the white checked pattern. If you defocus your eyes so that you lose that check pattern, you'll notice that this value in and around this hand is actually quite strong. So let's bring the value up there. Let's really strengthen this one in here. Let's bring it around under the collar. There's a little piece just in the hand there. And then moving up slightly, we've got a nice dark shadow area around the nose there. So we can add that in. And then we've got a nice dark area under the ear here. And this whole area here, which has been left quite light in the original drawing, this is actually quite a dark value. So again, I don't want to be too critical here because I think the artist by design has left this area quite light. This is a lost edge that kind of fades into the background. And I think that's deliberate, and it does definitely add to the overall composition. So the next area I'm going to look at is just around the forearm here. So we've got some really dark crease areas. There's a really dark area of shadow in this area of the clothing, and there's almost a bit of a halo effect going on around this arm. Same under here, but we won't take it too far again for those design reasons. And then the value on the top of the forearm here and the top of the hand is actually quite strong, and this goes back to, if you remember one of our earlier examples where we were drawing the thumb and we looked at planes. So we've got a definite plane here which is more in shadow, a lot more in shadow, the contrast between this plane here and this plane here, and definitely the plane of the front of the fingers here. There's quite a lot of contrast going on there. So we'll strengthen those and bring them up. So I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes bringing up some of the values here and there. I'm obviously not going to go over the entire drawing, but we're going to bring some of the values up just so that you can see where I think this drawing could be improved. So there's a quick example of how I would lift this drawing as a whole. So I've strengthened the darks predominantly around what I believe is the focal point. It's created a bit of a more of a halo effect to really help this part of the drawing stand out. And I mean, obviously I could spend a lot more time doing this. We could draw it again from the beginning, lifting all the values. There's a lot of work been put into this drawing by the artist. So obviously I'm very limited what I can do in 5 minutes on camera, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how this drawing maybe could be lifted as a whole. This second example, again, a difficult subject matter, and again, some very accomplished points to it. So there's a lot of nice shading going on. The proportion and the shape of the feet are flawless as far as I can see. But I think you'll agree that the darks within this drawing are too light. Now the reference photograph looks like it's either had some kind of an effect on it, maybe a polarizing effect, because the whites are bleached out almost and the darks are very dark. I don't think we need to replicate this entirely, but we definitely want to lift some of the darks around the toes, which is the focal point of this piece. So I'm going to spend a bit of time doing that now, and then we'll bring a before and after in. So although this is only a relatively short lesson and a simple concept, don't be fooled by its simplicity. I would say that well over half the drawings on Art Tutor, maybe more, could benefit from a wider range of values, especially those darker darks. Now the chances are that you're being too timid with your dark values and you're underestimating how dark that you need to go in certain areas. So print out the drawings that are in your course materials and print them onto regular copier or printer paper, and then grab an 8 or a 9B pencil and increase the values wherever you think that it's needed. And you can use the reference photos to help guide you through that process. And if you've done any drawings in the past, go and dig them out and take a fresh look at the value range. And if you're feeling brave, why not adjust 1 or 2 of those pieces with stronger values. Now value contrast is closely tied to another concept, value transition. So when you're ready, that's what we're going to look at in the next lesson.